So, welcome to season 2 of The Red Chair. Today we have a very special guest, one of our partners, Cristina Fonseca, founder of Talkdesk, one of the Portuguese unicorns, founder of Cleverly, and was then sold, and founder of Indico. And so we decided to, in launching this season 2, to have one of our partners and our entrepreneur in residence, Cristina, to sort of do a little bit of a recap of the last 10 years. We met 10 years ago. I think it was 2013 when I came back to Portugal and I found you because of the World Economic Forum. You could already see that something was, special was happening, and you were doing something really, really unique in Portugal. And now here we are, 10 years later, and we're working together since 2017.
It would be difficult to predict that.
It would be difficult. We started working together in 2017, launching Indico and trying to launch Indico. And so when you look back now at these 10 years, the ecosystem, the tech world, all the entrepreneurs, all the funds, all the crazy hype, and now the downturn, what are your views?
Look, super interesting 10 years. First of all, super interesting journey. Looking back, I'm not a person that plans life a lot, but then when you look back, lots of things made sense, and I'm very grateful and I'm very honored to be here today, sitting on these red chairs. So when we started Talkdesk, that was 2011. It was a little bit more than 10 years ago. We were aliens in the Portuguese ecosystem. I remember the first time we flew to the US. There was a Portuguese on the plane, talking, he was an entrepreneur based there. And I thought, okay, I never saw someone in Portugal talking about these things, but here they exist. So I remember that feeling very well. There were no investors, there were no entrepreneurs, no one with this global mindset. And we were just coming out of a crisis. So the economy was not in good shape. It was tough times. But we were following the ecosystem back then, the US one.
US ecosystem.
The US ecosystem, paying attention to all.
Why were you following the US ecosystem?
I don't know exactly, but I remember me and Tiago, at university, at some class of being super bored, and contemplating, okay, what could we build? So I remember very well that.
But why did you want to build things?
We were engineers. So engineers like to build things. And I think there was this challenge of proving yourself. And I remember some teachers that would try to convince us we were very special because we knew how to code. And that was a cool thing. So our degree was worth a lot of money and we were the most special people on the planet. And then we're okay, what can we do with this knowledge that we have? So that was fascinating. And I think at that time, I remember the Facebook movie coming out. And that was maybe a turning point. So you'd see, okay, so if this random guy can build a company in his dorm, just coding in front of the computer, maybe we can do something similar. What can we build? So we tried a bunch of ideas, they failed, because they were not the right ones. And so when I left university in Santiago, we stayed 1 year, basically exploring different ideas. We launched 3 things that failed. And I think the most important lessons were, first idea, too small of a market, targeting Portugal, very hard to scale, this can't work. Second idea, something that was not within our domain of expertise. We were trying to build something in the marketing space. We knew nothing about that. We just had fancy dreams that we were going to build a very special platform in the space. Didn't work. Third thing, it was a niche thing that we knew very well how to build. But we knew couldn't scale, because it was never going to be a big business. So none of these businesses, they were interesting, they paid the bills, but they couldn't be big success cases. And we were looking for this big thing. So
you already knew that you had to do something big, right? That there was no point on trying to do something, interesting but small.
No. So
Why did you know? Why did you know that?
We would read a million books, all the books. I remember my schedule. So all my friends had
jobs, right?
Which was very shocking for a lot of people. But I would wake up and I would read for at least 1 hour in the morning.
Real books.
like entrepreneurship books. Like I call them boring books because like, but these are the books that I like. And we learned marketing, we learned how to sell, we learned like the sale, like setting up sales machines, like everything about software as a service companies. We would listen to the first podcast, like Jason Calacanis had this week in startups with all the startup news.
That's right.
We would listen to that. Like it was a long time ago.
But not a lot of people were doing that in Portugal.
No.
Very few, actually.
Very few. But I don't know, like we just got very interested in that and we were following and we were trying and no one would understand us. And then one day you get the opportunity. So we participated in a contest. We won the contest. We were invited to pitch in the US. And when the opportunity was in front of us, we were prepared. And I think that was the key moment, right? Like it was not just you were very lucky. Okay, we were lucky, but we were prepared. So back then, building a company was like, if you had a very good product, you would make it, or chances were high, right? So I think there's a couple of things.
Because you were at the start of the SaaS revolution, right? And the cloud revolution.
Exactly. It was basically like companies were going to the cloud, and that was what made Talkdesk successful, because everything was moving to the cloud and call centers were not in the cloud. So we did a thing right. We did it right, but we did it at the right timing, which is very important. And like we just were like riding a wave when all these web internet companies came online and needed like phone services to support their customers over the phone. We became the default solution.
You spotted the opportunity in the right time, in a way, right?
Yes. So, and then like, but other companies did that. What we did well was we moved to the US. Then eventually I came back to set up operations here, but
the engineering part.
The engineering and product. Tiago stayed there. And we were always like a company based in the US.
And that is a really differentiating factor when you look at all the unicorns, many of which we were part of. They're all US based, right? Portugal and US, or Portugal and UK in the case of Farfetch, but basically Portugal and the US, it's still the same recipe.
And I would say today is even more, like you can't risk, for example, when we raised our series even after the seed round, we opened a real office and we hired a VP of marketing and a VP of sales after raising 3 million euros. So like our investors told us that you're going to use this money to set up a real sales and marketing machine.
In the biggest market in the world.
The biggest market
with top-notch people.
With top-notch people. Like they told us the contracts, like you go, I remember our VP of marketing, we hired an executive search firm to go find that person. And that person came from Salesforce. Like super early stage. I'm not saying like they were not the people that are with us.
But they were important stepping stones.
Very important. And these are the kinds of things like you can't do in Portugal because you might be lucky.
Or Spain.
You might be lucky. But like if you can find the type of people that have done it before at the scale you need, like it's question.
Of course you have more talent today, but it is still true that you need to surround yourself with top-notch people wherever they're from. And nowadays we even have remote working, right? So it's even easier.
Exactly. It's easier to attract talent. And I think that companies that are in Europe, in locations where like maybe there's not a lot of the talent available for these key positions, they should go and find these people somewhere else.
But being in the US is still absolutely key, right? It's the biggest software market in the world. That's where you get inspired to follow other Mark Zuckerbergs of today. And that's where you see the real competition, right? That's where the Champions League is played. If you're not there, quite frankly, you might be kind of fooling yourself in many cases, particularly if you're in sort of South Europe, right? It's just difficult if you're not in the real market, in the big market. Especially
because you look around, and in the US, you feel the pressure. Because you look around and there's lots of people like doing better than yourself, like hiring people faster than you.
Yes.
Getting like money from like the investor and what?
Top.
Exactly. So you already feel the pressure. If you are in an ecosystem which is less competitive.
So why do you think that there's a lot of companies that stay local and they hire locally even today. And they don't see that, they really need to sort of go global with their own people and consequently with their customers.
I would say comfort zone is probably one of the aspects. It's really hard for you to leave the place where you're comfortable. So, but there's no other way of building a global business, I would say.
And it's also, we were talking about just now about execution, right? It's all about, even before, if you had a SaaS business, the user experience could be bad. Yeah. And now you just can't get away. It's just so difficult to do something and to stand out from the crowd.
So if I compare the Cleverly experience, which is more recent, with the Talkdesk experience, it's not exactly 10 years of difference, but almost. Like at Talkdesk, you built a great product, and users we got to the first million ARR without investing anything in marketing, even more than that. With Cleverly, day one, you need to think about sales. You need to hire very UX people. You can't fail at any of the disciplines.
The expectations are so much higher.
So much higher. And the world is so competitive, People are companies and people in general, you're tired of being pitched the software that's going to change your
industry,
or your life. So as a startup, you need to get everything right and still hustle a lot in order for your business to make it.
And for that, you need to have the top people to do that, exactly. Right? Even more than before.
Yes. And on top of that, because there's a lot more companies being created, the chances of you being unique are smaller. So, probably there's 2 or 3 or 4 other companies that are doing what you're doing somewhere else, that also have access to capital, that also can hire global talent, that can also go to the US. So it's an execution game. You absolutely need to plan, to have the best people, and to execute at the highest level. It's the only way.
What else?
That fast.
And yeah, exactly. And so fast forward a little bit, you became an investor as well, side by side with being an entrepreneur for the second time. And what were the main conclusions after? You've now been investing and a partner at Indico since 2017, but we really started investing late 18, so 5-6 years. Were there big surprises as an investor?
Well, it's a different job, and it's sometimes frustrating because you feel you would do things differently, and probably you've been there and and still entrepreneurs have their opinions and believe they know better, so they don't pay attention to you, so that's sometimes frustrating.
Not as much as you'd like.
Exactly, but it's not your job as an investor, right? So I would say what we need to do well is to pick the right founders to back.
That's right.
And
because you can't really replace them, right? You can give them some advice, but you can't really replace them at their day job, right?
And I think sometimes it's tempting to look at a company and say, okay, if they did this differently, they would succeed. And that's a conversation you can have with the founder. And then the reaction of the founder and how they take your feedback is crucial for you to decide if you should do the investment or not. Because founders should ask for help. Founders should consider investors as partners and as people they can bounce ideas with and so on. But you can't replace entrepreneurs.
No, of course not. Was there anything else that you found surprising in the VC world that you weren't expecting, being on the other side as an entrepreneur?
So,
what did you think a VC did before you became?
I think that was one of the aspects I was going to mention. I think if you're an outsider, you don't you have no idea how much
appreciate. You don't appreciate.
It's hard for you to understand. For example, how long it takes to raise a fund, how hard it is to raise a fund. How much energy you need to invest in managing your own investors and creating a relationship with these people. So you believe the role of an investor is to invest money in companies, but actually there's 3 different things funds do. One is you also need to raise money, and that's a lot of hard work. And then to find that one company that's going to make it, you have to spend a delay. hundreds of companies. So
and then you have to sort of help manage the portfolio.
Exactly. So those are the three jobs you have as an investor. And I think when you're an outsider, you look at an investor and say, okay, like you just invest in companies and that's your job. But to get to formalize an investment, there's like a lot of hard work and a lot of companies you need to meet and a lot of deep dives. And you never know if you're making the right decisions until like within 10 years later.
And a lot of different angles, right? It's not only about tech, and I think entrepreneurs probably think it's just about my company, but there's also a portfolio aspect to it, right?
Exactly. No, that the entire like the business and the business model of running a fund was maybe a little bit of a surprise, something like I never thought about before.
Of course,
it's quite fascinating, right? Like you basically have a business, right? And you need to manage your business and you need to manage risk and all of that. So it's quite fascinating.
So you're happy? You think that this is a way that you're sort of giving back to the ecosystem by sharing your knowledge and...
Look, it's the only reason why I'm here. I think I could, and I remember in like after the Talkdesk transition, and still today, like I get a lot of calls from people trying to recruit me to go to London mainly, and I think like in London I would probably be one more investor. I think there's a very special aspect of me being in Portugal. There's lots of opportunity here. I think talent-wise, people have really a lot of potential. I would say I'm just a little bit frustrated sometimes that as a services economy, people are not very exposed to real business problems. Mm-hmm. So if you're told what to do by a client, you're never exposed to real problems that are worth solving. I think that would probably create more interesting opportunities and interesting companies. But still, there's a lot of potential. So that's the reason why I'm here. It's a great country to live in. It's where I have my roots. Of course, that helps. But I believe I can have a lot more impact being here rather than being in London or even in the US.
What are the mistakes that you think people have been making in the last few years? What are the sort of, sometimes we give this talk about capital sins together, and it's always good to share. You know, we've talked about great things that should be done. Surround yourself with talent. It's all about execution. Have the right investors. We can talk a little bit about that as well in mistakes you've seen. What are the sort of the real big mistakes that people do that they should stop doing in order to become successful?
So if I think especially on the fundraising side, one, if you don't pick the right investors, and I've seen lots and lots of founders deciding who to work with based on monthly valuation, because that's the perception they have. It's the most important thing for them is valuation and how much the company is worth. But they don't get that this is a super long-term game. It's a 10-year journey.
It's a step-by-step
thing. And the most important thing you can look for is investors that have a vested interest in making you successful. That's not always the case. So if you
and have the means to progress you in the right direction, right?
Exactly, like us, we are a professional investor. We will do well if our companies do well, and that means we must take minimum ownership of their companies because it's the way to make it work. But that's also very good for the founders because it means we are going to care. If we have 20% of a company, that's meaningful for us. We are going to...
Yeah, you have 1%.
1%, no one cares. So I've seen founders optimizing for the wrong things too early, and that can completely make or break the...
But it's so hard to explain this, right?
It is, because at the end of the day, when you go read TechCrunch, you only get the very good stories, right? And you never get the backstory. You just hear
all the bad stories, right? Which are 90% of them, right?
More than that,
more than that.
Especially these days, there's a lot more bad stories. But I think it's an industry very driven by sometimes ego and all the media and all the exposure, and that has been a little bit damaging in lots of cases.
Yes, particularly in the last decade where interest rates were low and money was easy.
Exactly.
And, we're all the best in the world and so on. I don't really need these investors, just give me the money and all the whole thing.
Lots of competition on if you have a good company, of course, you have lots of investors interested. So that would drive valuations up a lot. I think, for example, at Talkdesk, we were like lucky, and we raised money at very good terms, but that created like a bar that was very high for us. So if you see the Talkdesk,
It could have gone wrong.
it could have gone wrong.
Could have gone.
So there was a period of like 3 years during which we didn't raise money because we were basically like catching up.
Yeah.
And we were able.
Imagine a crisis like this would have hit in the middle of those 3 years.
It would probably be a little bit dramatic. But I think when founders, especially too early, when they still have a lot of assumptions to test, when maybe the traction is still not there, and they raise based on potential, if they raise on the wrong terms, like maybe
With the wrong people.
and with the wrong people, maybe they will put the bar very high for them, and then maybe they will get there.
And most
but
likely
we don't.
What else? What else have you seen that, obviously lying is a bad idea.
That is a bad idea. And I think that also was a consequence of this market where there's an imbalance between funds and money and entrepreneurs, because
Too much money.
too much money, so entrepreneurs are more or less in control. So then you would glorify all these unicorns. So everyone is trying to get to unicorn status because that makes you feel even extra special. So people would sometimes tweak the numbers or inflate things a little bit, or try to sell I have this MRR and then there's non-recurring revenue. So there has been a lot of tricks that entrepreneurs try to make to full investors.
Did that surprise you as an investor?
Look, a little bit.
Was it a little bit disappointing?
It's very disappointing, right? Imagine the feeling of you doing one of these early stage calls with companies. You meet a company, you get very excited, you believe you have something unique there, they discovered something, and then you start digging into the numbers and nothing makes sense. It's just very disappointing. There's nothing better than you doing a 30-minute call with a company you really like. It's energizing.
Of course. It's a new idea.
Exactly.
You found something special.
And then, if you dig deeper, and you're just disappointed with the real status of the numbers in the company. It's not the best feeling on earth. So
we've talked about not surrounding yourself with senior people, not having the right investors, pretending that you're something that you're not, lying. What else? Anything else that you can...
Not preparing for the long journey it is to start a company and run a company. So optimizing for the short term. That's also something you shouldn't do. Build an amazing product. I'm not sure if we were explicit on that.
Right.
But
it's absolutely key.
You can try to fake lots of things, but if you don't figure out a pain that's worth solving, that has a market,
a big market,
and that's something customers would pay for, if you ignore that in the early stages,
which is, by the way, the basics of any good business, right? You need to have a product that people want to buy for, on a profitable way, right? At least on a unit economics way.
These last 10 years were also about, okay, I'm maybe just going to throw money at a problem.
And it will...
And eventually I'll figure it out. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. That's when you start building a castle and then everything falls because the foundations are not solid enough. And to me, when I look at the entrepreneurs we fund and so on, I think the most successful companies are companies where there's at least one founder that's product obsessed.
Yes, and world class at what he's doing, right, in terms of product.
Exactly. So you need to be, I think what made me success as a product founder was that I was very obsessed about solving the problem for the customers. And it's not that, no one wakes up one day and does everything right, and, you have these shiny ideas in the shower, which is how people believe startups are built. Validating product is hard work. And even at Cleverly, I had to do that, and it was hard work. But I was obsessed about finding the thing that would make the company grow and people pay. This is the first job of the founders, I would say, is validate product and then fundraise and make sure the company has money in the bank to hire people that can come and replace you. If I look back at my Talkdesk journey, I think it was replacing myself as a founder every 6 months. So first you code, then you hire someone to code, then you're gonna like onboard customers into the product and try to understand like what's the thing that's gonna make or break the company product wise. Then that's kind of working. Like you hire people to do that. You go fix UX, you go fix customer service and this relationship with customers. Then you need to create an organization that's able to hire people, train people, onboard people, and you're more or less of an enabler. And then eventually we end up like finding office space and like and warming computers and having to give your table to people because you run out of space. So, but I would say I look at like my journey at Talkdesk, and every 6 months I would have a different role, and I would have to replace myself and go solve another problem and hire good people to take that over.
That's really interesting. And that's actually something that it's a good example of how founders should look at their own role, right? And see if are they replacing themselves quickly enough, which means is the company growing quickly enough, or are they doing the same thing in the last few years? And why is that happening, right?
Yeah. I think nowadays, also something that became quite common is to have founders ask for help and have coaches and have professionals that can help them make this transition, because it's not easy.
And it's not natural for a lot of people.
It's not natural. I think back then, like maybe because lots of things were a novelty and there was like a super strong entrepreneurial community. So like I had founder going through the same, then that became close friends. But I think these days things are a little bit different, and I think founders should ask for help, like even professionally. I think the most successful founders today have coaches or mentors.
Like professional athletes, right? You need to have people around you that help me be your best self, right? And we're living through a really difficult period for some companies now. Not all companies. The funds have money, so there is capital to be deployed, but it's difficult on a macro level. What would be the advice you'd give now for companies that are currently leaving the market and thinking about fundraising?
So first of all, I think with the greatest challenge, the biggest opportunities can be created. So I think this is an amazing time to build a new company.
To start or to build it? To
start or to build it, or to like take a step back, understand what's not working. Maybe you were just trying to react to all the noise that was out there and try to appear in the media and trying to fake it a little bit even. I think if you take a step back and understand, okay, how do I have a killer product? Maybe there's more talent in the market I can hire right now. Maybe it's the time to go to the US and hire sales and marketing. Like we've seen some of our companies that really had a hard time hire in the US, like maybe last year and this year. Now there's more talent available. So I think that's very positive. So my advice is, look, take a step back and focus on building the business. I always believe that raising money and the fundraising is as easy as, like, if you have a good business, like fundraising should not be a problem. So if you focus on that, the fundraising will come. So my advice to founders is like, go back to like the basics and make sure you have a super solid business. Everything else will come.
Wonderful. Sounds like a good plan. Let's go and find some of those. I hope you enjoyed this special episode, first one of season 2. See you another day.
Thank you.
Thank you.